We're about to dive into the newest lore available regarding the Indomitus Crusade and the rebirth of the Emperor of Mankind. Spoiler warning, these events are extracted from the new Black Library novel Dawn of Fire, Sea of Souls, but at the end will lean on a truly massive amount of setting-changing lore, which I promise will make your head spin. Spoiler alert, it has to do with the Emperor's rebirth and the King of Yellow. Well, this is going to be huge, so make sure you stick around for the whole video so you have the full picture. The events we're going to speak about now will indeed greatly influence the outcome of the Indomitus Crusade against the power base of Abaddon himself in the Eye of Terror, as well as provide some startling insight into a plot which has been developing over several books now in both the 30k and 40k timelines. That is the rebirth of the Emperor of Mankind. Before we get started, we are trying to hit 8k subs by Christmas, so if you do enjoy the fun lore and the insights we provide, consider becoming part of the community as we grow from a young channel into what I'd love to become a closely knit global community. Bloodline Heroes of Lithis is packed full with an insane amount of content. Watch to the end of this promo for a sneaky reward for the first 30 players watching this video now. From building up your own kingdom to finding companions to birth your heirs, this game has it all. Raise your children to become mighty champions to fight for you on the field of battle. Bloodline Heroes of Lithis is completely free to play on Android and iOS, so download it now using my link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen now if you're using a PC. An aspect of Heroes of Lithis that sets it apart so much from other mobile games is the breeding mechanic. Combine the bloodlines of different races to birth the ultimate champion, even going so far as to mold your champion's bloodlines through crafting formidable family trees. The combinations available are truly endless, whether you love elves, demigods and dwarves, or more into lycans, vampires and orcs. Bloodline Heroes of Lithis has something for everyone to enjoy, providing immensely entertaining gaming sessions for you. On top of all these fun choices, there's new characters added every fortnight, providing you with even more choices and fun to be had. All players can enjoy battling in the new Guild War on brand new maps, conquer territories with your guild members, and claim rewards to create the most unique hybrid champions called Bloodcraft Legends. The game is consistently updated, and now they added a new exciting tournament called the Luxus Tournament. With its intricate rules and strategic gameplay, the Luxus Tournament offers an exciting and challenging experience for all participants. Players who have played the game over 120 days are qualified to join the Luxus Tournament. Now, the first 30 players who leave their in-game account ID and username will receive a free legendary succubus champion, the Luxuriant. This character is one of the best mages to aid you throughout the game, so this is a huge head start. Download it now using my link in the description or use the QR code on screen for PC users to receive a free special starter pack worth $20. Indomitus Crusade Fleet Secundus has, even by the Lord Regent's own admission, fought the bloodiest wars on behalf of the Imperium, more than any other fleet. In fact, so perilous is the path that Secundus treads at the behest of Guilliman that its exploits so far have come to be known as the Path of Martyrs. So many of mankind's heroes have been lost forever, their souls consigned to oblivion amidst the laughter of thirsting gods. Since the hallowed return of Rebute Guilliman, bloody stalemates against the arch enemy had been broken. Where once wars would have raged for years if not decades, the corrupted forces of chaos were beaten, retreating into the darkness of the void. Many crusade fleets wrestled back control of imperial systems, whilst Fleet Secundus itself drew the enemy's attention. One battle after another, each successive conflict larger and more harrowing than the last. All within the crusade fleet had lost compatriots and friends amid the challenge of so many engagements. Yet this was the confluence of godlike planning, galaxy-wide efforts. Presented before Fleet Secundus was a clear trajectory to Objective Primus, Abaddon the Despoiler's seat of power. In truth, the fleet, which now mustered at U-93, is composed of so many hulls that it is whispered among the many crewmen victory may be close at hand. Navy intelligence of the Logus Strategis had assured Fleet Command that there remained little to no arch-enemy naval assets between the muster point of U-93 and their next rendezvous at Yoka. In fact, the Primarch himself had endorsed the intelligence supplied, providing yet another, perhaps superior layer of assurance to the elements of Fleet Secundus that their arduous campaign to visit the Emperor's wrath upon Abaddon himself was at last nearing its final crescendo, having been either slaughtered or drawn away on some other wretched unholy task. Chaos forces between the current muster and the road to the Eye of Terror are projected to only be half that of Battlefleet Secundus' own. Intriguingly enough, speaking true to the faith of those souls who composed the fleet, all were looking forward to this final reckoning. The fleet's renown, along with their reputation as martyrs, having attracted the most devoted, if not fanatical, imperial forces to its cause. All the fleet of faithful need do is plot through this empty space, navigate the Anaxian line, which is a cordon of imperial-controlled territories where Cadia once stood, then the battle group can make final preparations to finally advance upon the Eye of Terror itself. It is during this muster wherein Captain Kiastros of the battle cruiser Judgment of the Void is informed by the fleet master that his indomitable craft has been charged to watch over a peculiar inquisitorial vessel called the Gorgon. Having close dealings with members of the Inquisition can be tedious, if not ultimately fatal, even for loyal servants of the throne, though Kiastros himself is a staunch man of faith, considering his duty to the throne above any personal inhibitions. In another quirk of fate, a squad of 5 Astartes belonging to the Iron Shades chapter, as well as a single sister Hospitaller of the Order of the Jeweled Scepter, were accepted onto the ship. The Astartes as a means of defending the vessel in case of orders during the ensuing planned conflicts, and the Sororitas more so out of her own boredom and curiosity, herself wanted to escape the tedious sisters aboard her own vessel. The sister Hospitaller sought to escape the constant single-minded preoccupation of her sisters with venerating the Emperor at the sake of any other conversation or activity. The Space Marines of the Iron Shades chapter were fearsome of bearing. However, their manner, even to the mortal crew of the Judgment of the Void, was respectful, if not even kindly. Their armour was a dully reflective black with midnight blue trim upon the shoulder rims, and the chapter's insignia appears to be a shrouded skull centred by a sword picked out in bone white. Upon the formidable battle cruiser, morale and spirits both are lifted as Kiastros conveys to his senior officers that the Primarch personally acknowledges the action which Fleet Secundus has persevered through to date. It is their sacred duty to walk the hardest, darkest of roads, and they are all in his thoughts. However, events are to take a turn for the very worst when upon the main strategium something worrying begins to take place. Sensing something amiss, First Lieutenant Avati, along with Master of Signals, expands the Void map, broadening the main display. There, on the very edges of the perimeter, is something peculiar. The vessels of Battlefleet Secundus appear as they should, a sea of glistening stars suspended within the Void's depths. On the perimeter of the fleet's cordons, however, a series of distortions begin to appear in rapid succession. Almost instantly, the hiss of numerous combeats are summoned to life around the vast strategium, as upon the map, the fleet's first line of sensor pickets can be seen quickly withdrawing towards Fleet Secundus' first line of defence. At once, with incredible synchronicity, the numerous naval vessels begin to turn, the separate void ships becoming as one in a defensive shell whose inspiration is an echo of ancient hard-shelled beasts of terror. Looking out from the bridge, the sight is unforgettable, even scarring for those who allow their gaze to linger. Wounds are torn in the reality of space before the Imperial fleet. A sea of deranged, corrupted vessels spring into view, blinking into being, kin to some blasphemous roiling storm. Wound after gaping wound is slit open from where once was the darkness of the void. There are so many in quick succession as the line of wounds rolls on. As the flesh of reality is peeled back before mortal onlookers, the true horror of the warp stares back. Formation after formation of chaos vessels sail forth from the warp. Such a precise application of force that is truly overwhelming compared to the once mighty fleet Secundus. Emerging from these fissures are twisted, bloated, misbegotten vessels. Some are obvious corruptions of their erstwhile imperial selves, whilst others are so mutated that their original patterns cannot be ascertained, and to try and do so would likely drive any mortal mind insane. Arrayed before the Crusaders are vessels covered in spikes, tentacles, and any other nameless array of mutations one would not associate with a ship of the Void. Some bear jutting weapons bays which, even from the judgment of the Void's prow vid feeds, are drenched in sacrificial blood of what must be thousands. Others are so bloated. Extra layers of reinforcement have been fitted onto the outer hull in an attempt to contain whatever the vessel was transforming into. Colossal gun bays dwarf their smaller escorts, whilst out of blood-red hangars hordes of fighters pour forth, eager to deal death. This scene is played over and over again across the perimeter of Battlefleet Secundus, who is by now hopelessly outnumbered. This truly is a host of the damned. Almost at once they spread out rapidly. A well-informed displacement creates a cordon around the Imperial Navy's defensive lines to ensure no clear route of escape can be made. Their coordination says all there is to know. It is plainly obvious. Through deception and guile, more than likely a traitor in the Imperium's midst, the forces of the arch-enemy now execute a plan which has been long in the making. All throughout the mighty battlecruiser, ratings are sprinting to stations. Armsmen report to garrisons ready to sell their lives if need be. The general order to engage and repel is coursed within Secundus, and so the Emperor's servants brace for what appears to be their impending doom. If anything, feeling bitter as well as betrayed that they were robbed of making one final push into the eye. To those unaware, void combat takes place at thousands of miles between vessels, and so to the untrained observer that day, the epic roiling mass of mutated adamantium and steel would have seemed quite a distant threat. To the crew of the Judgment of the Void, they knew at this distance they would receive at best one shot with their formidable Nova Cannon before having to about face to administer broadsides into the oncoming foe. Even then, with the enemy outnumbering them by 2 to 3 times the fleet assets, a single ship kill would be a remarkable achievement. One last twist of the knife before they too were added to the roll of the dead. Fate often harbours mercurial plots, however, and before the Judgment of the Void could finish preparations to sell their lives dearly, the Inquisition vessel, the Gorgon, would speed ahead of the defensive lines. This forced Kiastros into an impossible decision. Did he follow commands and seek to protect the small exotic Inquisition vessel from impossible odds, thereby exiting the protective shell of the main fleet, but also leave them vulnerable? Or did he stay, knowing full well the Gorgon strode to meet its death? What ensued was a firefight of tremendous power, with the Gorgon, a small, sleek, dark vessel of unknown pattern, releasing incredibly destructive forces against the corrupt hordes. Its main guns seemed to send coalescing blue light crashing into the foe, but instead of rupturing and exploding, they seemed to implode and disappear. Nevertheless, it was never going to amount to enough to save Fleet Secundus. Following his orders of protection, forces Captain Kiastros to break defensive formation to support them. This would cripple the Judgment of the Void though, for even as Kiastros directed his vessel to overwatch the Gorgon, the Inquisition ship was obliterated, Kiastros' own vessel taking tremendous punishment in the process. The Astropath spire was crippled, cut off from the rest of the ship by the decks fusing between the hull and the spire, but worryingly, multiple boarders had breached the hull within the lower decks. A small escape craft did make good its escape from the Gorgon though, and was intercepted by Judgment of the Void, a handful of inquisitorial agents and their valuable cargo reaching the relative safety of their Imperial counterparts. With the successful collection of the Inquisition vessel, Judgment of the Void would make for warp translation. The remainder of the fleet somehow managing to escape, though we are not made privy at this point how that escape was effected. Within the lower decks of the battlecruiser, numerous boarders are detected with frenzied followers of the Dark Mechanicum slaughtering hundreds of hapless ratings. Though the Iron Shades, along with a full complement of armsmen, are successful in defeating one such force of intruders, it is at the cost of 4 of 5 of the Astartes, and all armsmen save the captain of arms himself, Garrick. The Astartes was barely alive, blinded, and only shallowly breathing. In fact, there yet survived corrupted Skitarii, though the quick-thinking Garrick was able to seal off that compartment before the murderous cyborgs could finish their bloody work. Unsure if the device they were working on was even destroyed, all the Captain of Arms could do was seek medical treatment for the Astartes sergeant, regroup, and hope the Dark Mechanicum forces were adequately contained for the time being. Elsewhere on the ship, intense repair efforts were underway. It was a wonder they were not dead in the void, let alone maintain the ability to safely traverse the warp. Within the Sea of Souls trailing them now, the navigator could sense 2 vessels shadowing them. They had escaped the muster at U-93, but could not hope to resist their imminent execution. With any long-range augers disabled following their recent crippling firefight, Judgment of the Void lacked the ability to identify the nature, let alone class, of the enemy vessels which now hunted them. This was only one of Captain Kiastros' many burdens, as part of the damage sustained during their recent action was to the astropath spire. No contact had yet been made with the sanctioned mutants. They were sealed within their quarters, decks between the astropathic spire and the main hull having fused together. Still, it was strange they had not made contact using their psychic talents, meaning they were either dead, gravely injured, or they too were dealing with boarders. As the hours ground on, it was obvious some corrupted presence was fueling dissent and hostility throughout the crew. Tempers were frayed, paranoia was creeping through the minds of many, and seemingly the entire crew was suffering from horror-fueled nightmares in the moments of sleep they managed to snatch between shifts. It was possible that whatever boarders remained, lurking within the lower decks, emitted some sort of hateful wave, though Captain Kiastros thought it far more likely that whatever cargo the inquisitorial entourage were hiding lay to blame. Even as between he and his lieutenant they attempted to gain information from their interrogated guest, the captain of armsmen conducted a hunt of his own. Garrick would attempt to track down and eliminate the corrupted presence within the deepest recesses of the ship. If he survived, they'd have closed out any loose ends from the battle at U-93. Though after being badly mauled by the Mechanicus Scutari once before, and the lone surviving Astarte sergeant still under the surgeon's knife, that is the lone sister Hospitaller, the many misbegotten populace of bilge rats, stowaways and gangers within the depths of the battlecruiser were commanded to raise arms against the intruder who violated the borders within their kingdom of darkness. As these events transpired, Captain Kiastros and his crew made a spectacular exit from the warp, their only chance at defeating the enemy ships tailing them. The enemy ship attempted to hail their opposing Imperial number numerous times, but Kiastros gave the order to cut all Vox lines. The archenemy were known to employ corrupting influences over long-range Vox, which could drive an operator insane in an instant. So while the combat was fierce and bloody, for the Judgment of the Void was gravely wounded, her long-range augers still not functional, they were successful in defeating the one vessel which presented itself, but not before it once again took aim for the Judgment of the Void's astropathic spire. Whilst this was undoubtedly a tremendous victory won in the name of the Emperor of Mankind, it presented yet more mysteries to the captain and his senior staff. You see, when combating the enemy vessel, it had seemed almost reluctant to do battle, keeping its distance even though the Judgment of the Void was so obviously wounded. To compound the mystery further, Kiastros had persuaded the Inquisition delegates to lend him use of their own sleek vessel, the powerful ship providing magnificent support during the Void duel before transmitting a coded communication that seemed to convey horror before disengaging, then subsequently being destroyed by the opposing ship. Indeed, rather than the sheer relief which should have been felt, Judgment of the Void, now free to make repairs enough to send some kind of astropathic signal to the wider fleet secundus, the tempers among her crew intensified still, with the paranoia of the second vessel still trailing them looming over all. For it could at any moment exit from the Void, ending the Imperial's good fortunes thus far. With so many dangers lurking both near and far, Kiastros would sound the order to jump once more into the warp, to at least seek sanctuary within that hateful realm where their remaining pursuer could likely not engage them. This seemed like madness to his first lieutenant Avati, who, seemingly not being affected by the malaise to the same extent as her captain, reasoned the warp itself was the last place any sane mortal should seek out a place of sanctuary. And so it was that once within the Sea of Souls, none of the mortal crew could maintain their faculties long enough to finish any meaningful thought. Kiastros was set about the work of manually exiting the warp, for the crews he had dispatched to cut through to the astropathic spire had not yet managed to pierce its inner sanctum. However, it seemed his first lieutenant's misgivings of entering the warp would ring true, as he could not hold on to his train of thought long enough to finish his projections for the ship's safe exit. Now this is the point in which the fate of the battlecruiser Judgment of the Void and all souls on board hangs in the balance. At this point, I will inform you there are 4 great mysteries on the verge of being unveiled. That is the locating of the ship's rogue boarders and whether they are responsible for the corrupting effects influencing the ship's crew, whether any survivors lay within the astropathic spire who can reach out to Fleet Secundus, the mystery so closely guarded by the Inquisition in one of the hangar bays of the vessel, and lastly, the true identity of the corrupted ship still pursuing them within the warp. The armsman's tracking of the border had uncovered numerous sites of slaughter. The pale, wasted denizens of the ship's deep recesses had indeed answered their lord's call, having roused many groups of hunting parties to flush out and end the threat to their lord's domain. Only when they fell upon the creature, seemingly wounded and lost within the depths of the vessel, so close to the warp drives, they were all of them cut down, some with such strength behind the blow that it bisected them completely. The numerous attempts by hundreds of these wretches had at this point amounted to naught, the creature having engaged in such bloody, skilled slaughter that not one of the ship's bilge rats had managed to land a blade upon its armoured hide. Survivors, wretched, pale, wasted things, had divulged the worst possible account to Garrick. The intruder was a red, armoured giant, brass edges detailing its battle plate, a corrupted Astarte. The Sister Hospitaller had done her best to restore the Astarte sergeant health, for he was needed. Though he was grievously wounded, chief among these being the loss of his sight, this was slowly resolving into a single blurred landscape, thanks largely to his transhuman anatomy, though it would not be in time for him to face the intruder in the ship's depths beyond his current condition. This would have to do. Administering what aid to the Space Marine she could, the sister donned her own battle plate, her sacred blade at her hip, and set off to join the drilling team. For as much as she wanted to aid the Astartes in his combat to come, it was known astropaths, when corrupted, can quickly mutate into beings harbouring demons of enormous power, and so her faith and her blade may be sorely needed, considering there had not yet been any signal of life from within the spire. With the help of the armsman, the lone surviving Ironshade Space Marine had established a cordon of sealed blast doors to funnel the wounded traitor Astartes into his path. Light here was non-existent, the ship's wounded systems limiting power output throughout the vessel, and so transferring electricity to more vital systems on board. This all-encompassing darkness suited him fine. The traitor's own helm sensors must be malfunctioning anyway, for otherwise it would likely have dragged itself up the main decks. He could hear the creature drawing closer, dragging itself across the deck. It had not yet detected his presence. He at once gathered all his momentum, launching himself at the exact place he knew his opponent would be, making full use of the near godlike senses gifted to him by the gene craft of the Emperor of Mankind himself. He was besting the beast. Now battle was joined, the armsmen moved up in support of their wounded ally, shining their weapons lumens on the 2 gods of war. But what they saw made the captain freeze in horror. He tried to hail the sergeant, desperately pleading with the Space Marine to relent, but he seemed lost to the same maddening influence so many crewmen had succumbed to already. The combat between the two was almost too quick to follow, but finally, blades dug deep. They had bested one another at the cost of their own lives. As the sergeant fell onto the dark, grime-encrusted deck, the last thing he heard from his dying opposition was the words, "You blind fool." Garrick was speechless. Both Astartes were dead, but both Astartes were loyal. This was not a corrupted traitor in service to the arch-enemy. It had landed upon their vessel, confused within the maze of lower decks, and, telling by his helmet's lack of integrity, with no way to communicate with the crew on the vessel. His desperate boarding must have been rough indeed to have injured an angel of the Emperor so badly, though now his message or mission could never be known. He must reach the bridge, must relay this newest turn of events to the captain. His men were looking jittery, even mutinous. Accidental deaths were not wrought among beings so perfect, and it was now merely another sequence of events on a ship whose discipline was fast waning to the excesses of violence. Quickly he was on his way, a team of armsmen at his back, though for how long he couldn't say. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the Judgment of the Void, Captain Kiastros informed First Lieutenant Avati he'd be taking a force of armsmen, ratings, and whatever other bodies were not fulfilling essential tasks with him to the shuttle bay which housed the Inquisitorial detachment. He was determined to excise the infection which so obviously pervaded his ship, and if that meant forcing the Inquisition to stand down or even to overcome their position by force, then he would do so. Avati cautioned against such action, for the captain did not seem himself, doubtless overcome by the constant unsettled feelings of irritation and paranoia she was confident all crew aboard the vessel now wrestled with. This wasn't good. They were stuck in the warp, no astropath to locate safe harbour, an enemy vessel still for all they could tell tailing them through the Sea of Souls, and now what amounted to open war against the most feared institution within the entire Imperium was threatening to break out. The captain gathered his force and descended to the shuttle bay housing the Inquisitorial agents. If Kiastros was successful in his attempt at overcoming the formidable Inquisitorial veterans, the ship's honour would be forever stained, and they would likely all be executed. On the other hand, were the interrogator and his forces to overcome the captain, the same fate would no doubt await them, only they would be ordered to safely deliver the entourage to their fellows beforehand. This was no choice. She could see no way out of their situation. While she held down the bridge unsure of how to proceed, Garrick, the captain of arms, finally was able to make contact. Avati directed him to locate the captain and, at risk of being accused of mutiny, restrain Kiastros, for both senior officers agreed he was not acting his usual, pious, noble self, and for his own sake, if not for all those on board, his current course of action must be prevented. It seemed almost absurd that any of them should be concerned with being trialled by Fleet Command for mutiny, for all about them was the creeping influence of warp-induced madness, the very stuff of nightmares. Meanwhile, the drilling team had at last pierced the inner sanctum of the astropathic spire. Many lives were lost as layers of debris depressed with the flex of the vessel, but ultimately the sister, senior engineer, and a crew of Mechanicus adepts were successful. Hoping against all hope that survivors would be present, the sister at least silently readying herself for the worst case scenario. Almost immediately the atmosphere seemed wrong, for that is the only way to explain it, and as the crew members advanced through the gloom, what lay before them was the stuff of nightmares. The astropaths had indeed fallen prey to the influence of some warp-spawned atrocity. The recorded hull breach during the conflict at U-93 had allowed some form of corruption on board. The twisted, mutated forms of all those present was testament enough to that. Thankfully, the vessel they had destroyed previously, having sealed off the astropathic spire with its own oddly aimed barrage, may have even slowed down the corrupting influence of the mutants present here. Lining the walls of the astropath's inner sanctum was the mutated, fused bodies of all those except the most senior of their number, who seemed to take pride of place amongst the menagerie of madness, no doubt possessed by some diabolical warp entity. To look upon the thing that was once a sanctioned, even honoured astropath of the Imperium was to stare into the gaping maw of madness, for the man's mouth was so widely, unnaturally agape that the battle sister, fully armoured, could have strode within it. A fierce close combat ensued, with distended mutant tentacles attempting to end the lives of those loyalists present, all the while the chamber echoing with the maniacal laughter of that horrific, distended maw. And try as she did, the sister's faith never waned for an instant. She was at last laid low by the head engineer, who had herself been turned against her companions, the psychically adept mutants feeding into the unfortunate woman's own deep-seated fears and dark history. She would turn a highly destructive mining laser on the sister Hospitaller, ending her life. The Judgment of the Void's astropathic choir would prove to be a pervasive, evil influence upon the bridge's crew. By utilising the corrupt astropath's abilities, whatever creature lay at the heart of their sanctum would plant the seed of doubt among many of the vessel's crew, each blossoming into paranoid thoughts, resentments and fears surfacing in ways that would either reduce the person to a helpless, frightened mess or turn them upon their fellows. One such being, perhaps even the one who felt the aggressive pull of aggression more than any other, was Captain Kiastros. He had confronted the Inquisitorial Enclave, and when they refused to hand over the secret within their possession, were butchered by the captain and his gathered rabble. And so would the determined Garrick, Captain of Armsmen, accompanied by a handful of his own frightened but loyal troopers, make their way to the shuttle bay, in which they hoped to find Kiastros and the Inquisition forces present and alive. As they ran, the scenes on every deck were the same. Madness was visibly taking hold. Vox emitters were blaring nonsense sound, picto lenses had lost signal, machinery was faltering, and the crew themselves seemed aimless and confused. The ship itself was failing, finally giving itself over, it seemed, to the same madness which had been gnawing at the sanity of its crew. The security detail chanted hymnals to the Emperor and whispered benedictions in an attempt to ward off the maddening effect as they made their way on foot to the shuttle bay. Cries of anguish rang out from the darkness deep inside winding corridors, but still they ran, determined as they were to cease the bloodshed about to take place before turning their attentions to the larger problem aboard. They'd hoped the Lord Captain may have managed to gain control of the situation, but as the team came upon the hangar bay, it was obvious that was the furthest scenario from what had transpired. Before even entering the inner shuttle bay, where the Inquisitorial forces were known to have holed up, corridors and rooms which lay before it were littered with bloody corpses. There was the sound of insects, and some of the corpses were decayed beyond what they should have been. The smell assaulted the team as they made their way through the scene of slaughter. Even the Inquisitorial team were spied dead on the decks. Death cult assassins, Inquisitorial stormtroopers, skilled warriors slain in the same fashion as the ship's crew. Garrick's team spied the captain, the lone survivor it seemed. His back was turned and it looked as if he was examining something. A thrum was in the air, an unnatural vibration. There was a bright light emitting from an opened casket next to Kiastros. Though the light was not holy or pure, it seemed off, tinged with hues of green. Garrick addressed the captain, lasgun trained on the solitary figure. As he turned, the changes wrought upon his face were so ghastly, he was barely visible. His skin had taken on a grey tinge, stiffening about the curves on his face. Lines of age upon his face were deep set, and his eyes were ringed with red. A glistening, sickly sweat coated the man's features, which shone in the unnatural light spilling forth from inside the metal casket. As he spoke, the captain's teeth were visible, having aged and cracked. "Are you well, Garrick?" Captain of Armsmen asked of his lord. "I am very well, Garrick. I am very well, indeed. Everything is clear to me now. Everything. And I now see a great victory here. My victory. Our victory." The captain's words were unsettling, but Garrick could see within his lord's hand a long stone blade tarnished with age. It looked so incredibly ancient, as if from another era entirely. Garrick was overcome with the feeling that the old relic did not belong. The blade, as well as the captain's forearms, were coated in blood. His hands were blistered and weeping. He grasped it tightly, even as the weapon seemed to be feeding on his very vitality. In fact, the blade seemed to be controlling the captain, fused to the man in some wrong, unholy fusion of artifact and living being. In his now quite mad ravings, the captain confessed that the blade, in conjunction with a different influence, no doubt the possessed astropathic choir, were indeed the source of the pall which had settled over the ship and her crew. But it was okay, he claimed, as the blade would now guide them to their final destination. Captain Garrick, loyal to his lord captain, but also realizing the depths of madness Kiastros had plunged into, attempted to convince him to hand over the weapon, but of course he would not. Finally, there was nothing for it but to try and wrest control from Kiastros. Aiming to disable the captain by targeting his kneecaps, Garrick and his men fired, though their shells and lass bolts both never found their mark. Kiastros had disappeared from view, appearing a yard away. Sprinting towards Garrick's cohort, he would flicker, waving his sword abruptly in front of him, before disappearing once more. There were dark trails left in his wake. Whatever force the captain wielded in their midst was of a cursed nature. Again, the blade appeared to be controlling, if not wielding, the captain. The once devout naval officer devolved into naught but a flesh vessel to deliver the weapon's wrath. Even as Garrick and his men loosed shot after shot, none found their mark. The blade was pushing the captain hard, beyond any mortal ability. It was surely only a matter of time before the muscle and sinews which supported his frame would protest and give way. Time was not something Garrick had, however, as in the seconds it took to loose volley after volley at the thing which had been his captain, the distance between them had all but been swallowed up. He was amongst them now. In a handful of seconds the captain had made short work of Garrick's men. Both captains drew their blades, the armsman making one last-ditch effort to reason with Kiastros, but to no avail. He too was slain, Kiastros whispering to his faithful servant that he may even find a way for Garrick to serve in death. Horrified and appalled, a deep wave of unconsciousness took the faithful captain of armsmen. And so we reached the final mystery, the vessel which had been trailing them for so long, haunting their every movement. First Lieutenant Avati had urgently made her way to the navigator's realm within the vessel. She pleaded with the elderly woman to make the jump from warp into real space. The vessel was becoming overrun with insanity. The Sea of Souls would only magnify the maddening effect on the crew. But even as she requested this, for the navigator to understand why the corrupt captain's orders must be countermanded, she too realised the time for intervention against this pervasive evil was far departed. The navigator had always disliked Avati, and now the suffering she too had endured within the vessel, paired with her own gazing within the tumult of the warp, had dashed her own efforts to survive the hellscape. The judgment of the void was fast becoming. She opened the shutters. The blinders mounted upon the ceiling of the navigator's inner chamber, which blocked the sight of the warp outside. She would make the upstart lieutenant gaze into the same horror she was ceaselessly made to. As Avati stared into the multicoloured spectrum of the warp, unable to tear her gaze away from the maddening hellscape beyond, a spectral vessel came into view. It was a battle cruiser, identical to their own save for the visible corruption of its surfaces. Battle wounds seemingly healed over, and baleful lights burning within its depths. Even the astropath's spire ended abruptly. There was no second ship, the navigator explained bitterly. Within the Sea of Souls, time moves differently, and within it exists a mirror of all things from the material realm, be they living or otherwise. This was the end, Avati realised. The vessel which had been pursuing them was this hellish fate. Its agents on board working to bring about this moment now, to be realised as this corrupted version of itself. The pervasive evil that powered the ghostly vessel beyond the viewing window had not tracked them through the warp, but through time, to realise itself in the present. The transparent vessel floated close now, slowly overtaking them. The others, she realised, had failed then. The sister and the engineer crew, Garrick's efforts to arrest the captain, they had all failed, and now they were damned. And so was the fate of all aboard the Judgment of the Void sealed. What crew remained were corrupted beyond comprehension, more extensions of the corruption which pervaded the vessel emanating from the astropath's spire than they were traitors in any way. The captain too strode the halls of his vessel, utterly insane, lost within the madness the Nurgle corrupted Athame had cursed him with. Kiastros had long since ended the lives of all those faithless as he considered them. Content, any who remained were indeed those loyal to him. Finally, his once proud vessel, guided by malign intelligences rather than helmsman or a navigator, came to dock at the destination he had waited so long to see. Amid the broiling etheric seas of the warp, within the eye of terror itself, the battlecruiser Judgment of the Void would make dock within a dark vessel so large, its gates alone dwarfed the battlecruiser. Inside, Kiastros would hand over the corrupted blade to a being called Tenebrous, Hand of Abaddon, before making his way back to his own vessel, confused and mournful at the loss of his ancient weapon, his soul forfeit as he now readied himself for an eternity of servitude. Now this is where the novel ends and the true fun begins. That is, joining the pieces of the puzzle. It's no secret that Chris Wright, the author of Sea of Souls, is an excellent writer, and at this point seems one of the Black Library authors who are in the know, and involved with the progression of the 40k plot, along with other great authors such as Dan Abnett. For those unaware, Chris has written such epic tomes as Warhawk, The Regent's Shadow, and Valdor, the latter personality particularly relevant to our discussion here now. So there are a few plot points not necessarily spoken about openly within Sea of Souls, which converge together more or less within the very last portion of this novel, which we'll delve into now. These are the last shard of the Anathame being procured by Abaddon's followers. We'll explain that significance in a moment. How the plans of the Hand of Abaddon Tenebrous wind into what is likely the single greatest subplot ranging between both the Horus Heresy and Indomitus settings right now, the rebirth of the Emperor of Mankind. But to adequately do this plot justice, we need to delve into the Anathame first. And lastly, Battlefleet Secundus making preparations for one final, decisive push into Abaddon's supposed power base at the Eye of Terror, which, considering the corrupted Captain Kiastros' observations at the end of the novel, seems like an ill-fated venture at this point. Okay, the Anathame is not simply a powerful weapon imbued with the corrupting influence of the Chaos God Nurgle. Those 40k fans familiar with the Horus Heresy series will already know that it also contains mystical abilities such as creating tears in reality or travelling back in time, as we see in the case of John Grammaticus and Delanius Persson. It is also the weapon originally used to wound the Emperor's beloved son and Warmaster Horus. But not only does it have the power to lay low quite possibly the most powerful of the Emperor's sons, when wielded by a bearer who is aware of the blade's full potential, the Anathame can be given a target to seek out. Kind of like how the One Ring seeks out Sauron in Lord of the Rings if the ring wanted to mortally wound him. Not only this, once the unfortunate victim is chosen, the Anathame will become the bane of its target. No matter the race or fortitude of that being, they will become so susceptible to the blade's touch that were they to be wounded with the Anathame, their death is all but assured. By the hands of Erebus, the Anathame blade had 8 shards broken from it, of which were forged into the Athame blades, the original Anathame staying in the hands of its current owner, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children. The forces of Abaddon, notably not Abaddon himself in case that evolves into something further along, have now obtained, with the help of Kiastros, all 8 Athame shards, though whether they also have the original Anathame last seen in Fulgrim's possession has not yet been stated. If they do, then all the Athames can now be reforged together once more to become the fated Anathame, a blade which has the power to kill a god. But who within the galaxy is so powerful they require laying low by a blade such as this? Why, the shard of a god, of course. You see, as we've been treated to within the novel and in the Death Part 2, prior to his final showdown with Horus, the Emperor casts into the void that portion of him which had come to care for his Primarch sons, his love for humanity, all of his compassion. He removes them all and casts them away. He foresaw that emotions such as these may very well stay his hand when it came to finishing Horus. That, and if he didn't, in the ensuing years, whilst he helped mankind in realising its full potential away from chaos corruption, the act of murdering his own son would slowly corrupt him in a similar way it had Horus, beginning events anew. In the end, the Emperor made the only choice available, and with it, the ultimate sacrifice for all mankind, his humanity. Now in doing this, the Emperor creates 2 more overarching story arcs. One, the potential of his purely unemotional, darkly logical side ascending to become the Dark King, and secondly, his human portion is set adrift, said to one day be reborn into a human vessel of spiritual purity called the Star Child, a particularly old aspect of 40k lore which was more or less retconned out of existence until its reintroduction now. So now in 40k we have the Emperor who resides upon the Golden Throne, who also has the potential of ascending to become the Dark King, but we also have his fragment of light and hope somewhere in the galaxy. In older lore there are various sects called the Sensei within the Inquisition and other radical groups who have made it their life's work to locate this portion of the Star Child, but whether they'll also be introduced into the setting is unknown at this point. But what can be matched up to the Star Child are two plot lines which do currently exist. That is the current goals of Tenebris, but also the King in Yellow. Firstly, Tenebris, the Hand of Abaddon, who appeared at the very end of the Sea of Souls novel, is on a quest to prevent the birth or awakening of a child who it is foreseen will bring ruin to the Chaos Pantheon. This, we can only assume, is the portion of the Emperor of Mankind, the Star Child. Secondly, the King in Yellow, more than likely Constantine Valdor, can only be preparing to aid the Emperor in some way. We know he isn't aligned to Chaos, the Imperium, or any other faction. The King in Yellow is his own faction. But don't make the mistake of believing that not being aligned to the Imperium means setting yourself against the Emperor. The Imperium in its current state is the opposite of what Valdor's beloved Emperor wanted for mankind. Personally, there's no doubt in my mind that the King in Yellow will play a huge role in the Emperor's rebirth. Now, at the end of the Bequan novel Penitent, we see Valdor's City of Dust come under attack by what seems to be a Chaos fleet. Given that Dan Abnett himself has been quoted as saying the novel to follow Penitent will be universe changing, could this actually be the forces of either Abaddon or Tenebris preventing the birth of the Star Child? Their athames or anathame could grant them the ability to do so, making the voyage from the Indomitus era back a few centuries to head Valdor off at the pass. Does Valdor possess the humane portion of the Emperor, or even the Star Child, or maybe is readying himself to locate it? Could his work around creating Grails be to grow his own vessel, who would be the Star Child? For those unaware, the King in Yellow is known to breed psychic blanks with the ability to wield psychic powers, called Grails. As such, would this make Eisenhorn and Ravener, along with their teams, the new sensei? I've linked a video on the description where you can get up to speed with what we're talking about. Or perhaps an outlandish thought, as the Emperor on the throne conspires to his own ends, does his other fragment do the same? Is the King in Yellow actually the Star Child? There are other novels and lore mentions which could very well work into these theories. That is the Dionysian spear wielded by Leman Russ, which is the opposite of that wielded by Valdor, the Apollonian spear. Could each spear be matched to a portion of the Emperor? Dan Abnett, the author of Eisenhorn, Ravener and Bequan series, as well as End in the Death Part 2, has been quoted as saying there will be further novels following his initial Black Legion trilogy. Will these also link into Abaddon's quest to slay the Emperor? There's honestly so much to talk about. The events of this new setting in 40k are so exciting, and you'll always find the newest up-to-date facts as well as theories here on Titan Wargaming. To ensure you're always alerted when we post, smack the sub button and hit the notification bell. I promise you I'll be staying extremely close to these plots and will prioritise video content concerning new lore so we're all kept on the same page. I also want to quickly detail some of the plot lines or events from the novel I haven't included in this video, for those who may be wondering about the Sea of Souls. All events having merged to deliver the Athame to Tenebris, we can reflect on the events of U-93, that is, the ambush at the rendezvous. Coordinates were obviously relayed by a traitor in the Crusade's midst. The Black Legion have somehow known that the Inquisition vessel, the Gorgon, contained the Athame, and so that is likely why the ambush was set. It is also my suspicion that the loyalist Astartes, slain in the bowels of the ship, was of the Red Hunters or Exorcist chapter. They would be the closest thing outside of the Grey Knights to a chapter who would fully grasp what was about to occur on the Judgment of the Void. It is mentioned by Kiastros before his delusions set in that he received word of Fleet Secundus reaching safety. How this was achieved is never detailed, though I'm eager to learn because they seemed done for, to be honest. Maybe having infected the Judgment of the Void, the Chaos Fleet pulled back, but that seems unlikely. Hopefully we find out in the next Dawn of Fire novel in the series, and also learn more about this final push towards Abaddon's power base within the Eye of Terror. It comes to light within the story that the reason the Judgment of the Void's first pursuer was so hesitant to engage, and why they kept targeting the astropathic spire, was because they sensed a corrupted presence on board. Of course, they were actually a loyalist Space Marine vessel, but Kiastros had no way to detect who they were fighting. Believing them an enemy, his navigator mistakenly thought both ships in pursuit were Chaos vessels instead of just the one. One thing I found interesting and took a note of during the novel was that various characters, high-ranking officers and even the Sister Hospitaller, were not very interested in the overzealous fanaticism of Emperor worship. These were self-reflections, as none would ever voice it out loud, and they did each believe in the Emperor's divinity. However, they didn't like to engage in the outlook that all aspects of life should be wholly devoted to him. In previous lore, aside from perhaps Space Marines, this type of outlook isn't really stated or shared about any loyalist, so I'm not sure if this is a way of Chris Wright conveying to the reader how dark and misled times have become in the Era Indomitus, or an attempt by Black Library to water down the fanaticism of the Imperium a little, hopefully the former. In all, this is a really fun story. I'm not usually one for void combat, but the mix of that with the slowly evolving horrible events on board really kept me engaged. I have to say I was initially quite disheartened with the lack of new lore involving the 40k plotline, that is until the very end, where everything is drawn into perspective. We'd really love to grow the community to 8k by Christmas, so there isn't much time left. If you do enjoy our content, you know what to do. Also, leaving a like and share helps us in a massive way. I'd love to grow a close-knit global community of lore enthusiasts and hobbyists, so pop on over to the Discord and say hi. The link's in the description. We have a Patreon which delivers excellent value. What you receive in each tier was even voted on by you guys on our YouTube community page. The highest tier at $9.99 is even a high-res artwork by talented 40k artists, which you can post pride of place in your own home or office. Thank you so much for watching and taking part in the channel. I really appreciate it. Until next time, take it easy and have a good one.